Welcome to the pod, you accursed. This has been a week in politics with massive impact and reverberations here in Canada, the U.S., around the world, which feels to me like an evergreen intro we could just repeat for the next 4 years or so. So we'll get right to it today with the best panel in the political pod multiverse. Yes, I said multiverse because that's how goddamn good these people are. Jordan Leichnitz is with us. Kory Teneycke is with us. Scott Reid is with us. I'm David Herle. Here is the rundown. We're talking about the LPC having a new leader as of last night in Canada, having a prime minister in a day or two, Mark Carney. Sounds like there's going to be a quick election, so we'll get into that and maybe take a look back at the politics of Justin Trudeau for a little bit. So, first of all, Kory, how did you enjoy a Liberal leadership convention?
Well, I had a lot of fun, actually, hanging out with you guys. As I was saying before we got on air, I was a 12 out of 10 on fun last night, which means I'm about a 3 or 4 out of 10 on fun this morning. But it was good. It was good. It was Scott and I were sitting at the CTV desk for most of the afternoon and evening, and that was good fun. As was dinner and bullshitting afterwards.
Jordan, could you be found opining anywhere on television yesterday?
Nope, I was hanging out with my kids, but we watched, and they were all of the thought that it was Ella Grace and Cleo Carney with a side of Jean Chrétien who had won. So, mixed reviews in our house.
It's the moment of Chrétien sitting down next to Scott and shaking hands. It was like a very friendly handshake for considering the
He didn't recognize him. He didn't recognize him. Scott's put on so much weight,
Exactly. He was like, I used to know a thin lady who looked like you, but that was a sweet moment, and we got to shake hands, and I've told this story before, but the moments are too bookended to let it go by. But in 2013, when Trudeau was selected as leader, Kevin Newman and I co-hosted CTV's coverage of it, and we were on this tiny little riser, and all of a sudden they came scurrying up. They put a third chair, one chair in between Kevin and I, and they said, "We've got a guest coming." And then sure enough, Jean Chrétien shows up. Except that night he fully recognized me, remembered me, and remembered some of the events that led to his departure from office. And so he turned his back entirely to me, and I just began to grab my chair and go ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk right off the side of the riser. And then he turned to Kevin Newman and he goes, that guy ate me. That guy and his buddy Herle, they ate me. Last night I said, how are you? Good to see you, Mr. Chrétien. Hello, I am Jean Chrétien, son of Welly. How are you? We are going here to Vive la Canada. And I didn't think he had the slightest fucking idea who I was and didn't care.
Yeah. I thought his remarks were pretty Grandpa Simpson-esque, but anyway, maybe I'm just being uncharitable. The crowd lapped it up. I can't tell you how many people sent me notes going, my favorite thing was Chrétien. They lapped it up. They loved that. I thought it was maybe losing the plot for a second when he was talking about 1958. Liberals love that. They literally love it. I wonder if
it's an impressive show for a person of his age. Obviously.
I was going to say, may we all be that cogent at that age to be able to deliver a Castro-length-esque speech in front of such a crowd.
At 92, if you're on the right side of the dirt, you're doing well. So that's.
Yeah. And then I got kicked out of my seat for champagne because he goes, "Excuse me, we are doing all of the shenanigans. We have the master of ceremonies, Mr. Chrétien, but then I am also joining because I like to make deals and deals and deals." And,
he is the smallest man in politics. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean just physically. He's a wee person with heels. It's tiny bubbles. Tiny bubbles.
He's a French leprechaun, but he is uncompromisingly enthusiastic. So it was.
That is true. That is true.
So speaking of enthusiasm. The vote yesterday.
Yes.
The vote yesterday. People thought that Carney was likely to win. People thought that it was a good chance it would be over on the first ballot. People did not know the kind of beating it was going to be. People did not know that Freeland was going to get 7% of the vote, or Gould was going to get 3% of the vote, or that Carney was going to get 86% of the vote. What is, I don't want to diminish the Carney People's Organization because my friend Mike Burton will kill me. So I'm sure that it was
the happiest bastard in the place yesterday.
He's great, and I'm sure they had a great organization. But everybody who talks to me about the Carney events and the Carney, all that stuff, says they didn't recognize anybody who was at the events. Like, these are genuinely new people that were showing some interest in Carney, that were coming out, signing up, etc. So, I'm tempted to crap on the people that ran Freeland's campaign, but I'm also, on the other hand, sort of settled into the notion that something out of their control was happening here, that they maybe thought they were running a normal leadership campaign where you sell memberships to the usual suspects and round everybody up, and that something more organic was happening out there that couldn't be dealt with by organization. Scott, what's your take overall?
Yeah, possibly. I sort of have the same reaction today to this issue that I had yesterday, which is when someone gets 86%, who gives a fuck about second and third? Like, there's really not much to pour over. I mean, the fact that, to your point, yes, it's true. George Shahal, right? Great member of parliament, great organizer, right? He was chatting with me on the margins. I don't know if he was having this conversation with you, David. He told me that they, at last minute, they tried to organize something in Calgary a couple of days ago, and they got 600 people. He hardly knew anybody in the room. It's great when you don't recognize anybody in the room, right? That's a compliment. It means, holy smokes, we're attracting people off the street. We're attracting new people. So I think that was happening. I don't want to pretend it's Beatlemania. Let's not get over the top, but they were dealing with something organic. The other campaigns, when it came to Carney, I do think the guy's kind of purpose built to meet the moment. But I would still say this, and I don't mean to be a dink, because no one wants to, why shoot the wounded? But there is still no excuse, and there is no explanation for how an organization with people, with the number of members of parliament that Chrystia Freeland had endorsing her, with the seasoned organizers that we've known for 25 years, David, for her to get 11,000 votes. Like, that's the raw number of votes. Forget the points and all that stuff. She got 11,000 votes. She got 11% of the vote in her own riding. In her own riding, her leadership campaign could marshal 11%. So there's a failing there. It's immaterial. Maybe it's abuse of me to mention it, but I'm not willing to give them a complete pass. They should have found more than 11,000 votes in the entire fucking country of Canada.
Yeah, or she should have stepped off. That's the other thing. I think
shouldn't have gone to that point, right, Jordan?
Right. Yeah, I think
she didn't have it. Yeah,
I think it's abundantly clear now that her time to depart was after the debates. That would have been the moment, and I can only assume that her team did have organizers who were competent enough to know at that point what the situation was, and that's the advice that should have been given, because this has
before you drag out Larry Summers.
Yes, I don't have a vote, but if I had one, I'd cast it for her. No, you would be alone.
I mean, and I think, she's weakened, she's gone from the person who delivered the Liberal Party from Justin Trudeau and provided the conditions for any kind of a revival. And there will not be everyone who's going to thank her for that because of the manner in which she did it and because of her own history of working within that caucus. But it was still something, right? And that's all gone now. She's in a very weakened position. I don't think we're going to see her in any kind of a senior portfolio. The time in the wilderness for her is just starting now. And I think that could have been prevented if she'd stepped off of her own accord before this result.
Do you think she'll run? I know she said she was going to, but do you think she ultimately will? I got to think after that, the odds are lower.
She's got to be really bruised by that. Yeah. I don't even think she knows today what.
It's a humiliating defeat. I think at that level, It's reminiscent of Charest getting his ass absolutely handed to him by Poilievre. Like, you know, you're not a mainstream candidate when you're like half, like, well, Charest was 15%. She's half of what Charest was. So maybe that's unfair to Jean Charest. But I thought like 15% was humiliating. Like 8. Oh my God.
Yeah, and you have to wonder for her, like, is her best place right now, you know, running third string in a Carney run Liberal Party into this campaign? There's a lot of places right now, for example, in the transatlantic relationship, where her expertise and her connections could be really useful in work that's probably a lot more interesting to her.
Well, as J.D. Vance pointed out, they're looking for lots of people on the front in Ukraine, so no shortage of opportunities. Probably fewer.
Could we send him there first?
Probably fewer people shooting at you than running for leadership too. It's what an ugly business, but
it is. Yeah.
You know, you got to feel for these people, but you know, Gould, I actually thought was to do better. Like, I kind of believe some of the hype. She had, you know, she did, I don't know, every media interview she could find. And I think won a lot of respect from the gallery. And as per usual, that and, you know, $1.50 gets you half a Starbucks coffee. It's just, you know, completely meaningless at the end of the day.
But I think it's different for Gould, right? Because the expectations were always much lower for her going in. She proved herself to be a very capable communicator through that campaign. So the result, I think, obviously speaks to the fact that the Liberal Party has coalesced around Carney in just a massive way as their choice to confront the Trump threat. But I think for Gould, she's actually very well positioned to take a more senior role. And that would be a boon, because Carney is going to need to do something to shore up the left flank of the party, because this has given him a huge mandate to turn right. So
if
it would be smart to pull her in.
If 8% sucks, like, think of how much worse 3% is.
Yeah.
Like, that is not the leader of...
8% sucks when you've been the deputy prime minister.
Well, but if you're saying I'm the candidate of the progressive wing of the party, it says there, you know, either there is no progressive wing of the party, which I don't think that's true, or people didn't think you were a very good person to actually be representing it, because you basically got no votes. Like 3%, like you're in joke candidate territory. So, like, I don't think I would be, you know, jumping up and down with excitement about 3%, even though expectations were low. That's fucking abysmal.
Yeah, I don't think it's about the result. I think in her case, you can just say, people say, oh, well, I was forced to take notice of her. I'm not going to actually hold the measuring stick as the actual vote total. It's just that she put herself apart and above from a bunch of other never heard of those guys cabinet ministers. So just in that, like, if Carney wins a general election, what are the cabinet sweepstakes? She probably improved her standing in that world.
Well, I would have been interested. I think we're talking about this on air or something, but I would be interested to see where the second and third choices for candidates were. And like, if she actually solicited more second place votes than Freeland would, that would have been an interesting thing to know.
Well, Mike, you know, the last thing about Freeland is, over the course of the campaign and over the course of yesterday, talking to people, yes, I shouldn't be surprised because we talked about it on the show so much, but people really blamed her for the decline of the government standing politically. And they really blamed her for the fact that they had, as Liberals, no compelling thing to say about the economy for years and years, and just got pummeled. Like, there was a real sense that she had been a big part of the problem.
Her inability to communicate in a compelling way, in a way that people could bear to watch. You just hear it nonstop. So we'll see what she does. But I mean, Carney, it's interesting. Like, if you're Carney, you know, you say, well, you're keeping all the cabinet ministers who are in critical U.S. roles in place, at least for now, right? And say this next week before you call an election. Okay. But those are also senior people who then endorse you. So you got Dominic, you've got Champagne, you've got Melanie Joly. So you have to figure out, those guys are not, like, you assume they're going to maintain senior cabinet roles. Like, if he were to win, he also wants to attract, presumably. Like, I assume there'll be something akin to star candidates. I'm not saying he needs all of that, because ultimately this show is going to be about him and about Trump and about Poilievre. But, you know, you'd want to try to bring in a couple of people and signal change to new blood and give yourself something that's a little more for. So So chairs start to become a little bit dear, is all I'm saying, around that cabinet table in senior positions.
If my 40 plus years as a public opinion researcher has taught me anything, it's this. Healthcare isn't just a system in Canada. It's fundamental to who we are. At our core, we're a people who have each other's back. We believe everyone deserves access to quality care precisely when and where they need it. But beliefs alone aren't enough. That's where innovation comes in. As Canadians, we're constantly seeking ways to improve healthcare, to create a system that makes healthcare more convenient while reinforcing the very values that define us. These last weeks, I've been talking about how our presenting sponsor, TELUS Health, a proudly Canadian company, has been innovating healthcare technology. A shining example is the TELUS Health MyCare platform. Built with some of the best technology available, it's been fully customized to meet the specific primary care needs of Canadians. So here's what I meant when I said convenient. We're all accessing so much more of our care virtually, right? MyCare puts the proverbial boots to sitting for hours at a walk-in clinic, finding parking, taking transit to your doctor's office, or having to waste time taking off work, running down test results, or getting prescriptions refilled. Without getting too deep into the technological weeds, it amounts to a comprehensive, primary, publicly funded healthcare right there in the palm of your hand or on your screen. You can have a video appointment with a family doctor at no cost. After the consultation, you can get prescriptions, labs, or referrals directly through the app. And if you choose, your prescription can even be delivered right to your door. And TELUS is building and integrating new features, including AI and machine learning tools to improve patient experience all the time. Your medical records are also securely stored while giving you 24/7 easy access to your medical history and test results. We can be rightly proud of our universal system and the steps many are taking to make it better and more accessible. I'll speak more about how TELUS Health MyCare is built on Canadian values next week. Let's just try to assess the whole Carney thing for a second, and I'll use the term phenomenon not in a Beatlemania way, but in a accessible event development thing. What is at the core of it? So you talked, Jordan, about the coalescing of the Liberal Party around Carney. So it is still the case that people in the party don't know him very well. It is still the case that people that are in the cabinet have only met him recently or gotten to know him recently. Canadians don't know him very well at all. And, you know, all of us would be skeptical of what they've seen in terms of Carney's performances, all that kind of stuff. And yet there is this thing going on out there, this thing in the polls, this thing in terms of people signing up for the party and voting for him. Kory, what is working for Mark Carney right now?
Well, I think part of it is it's probably one of the most impressive resumes of anyone you can imagine in Canada. Like, you know, this is a guy who is a bootstraps of story. You know, this is not some patrician who went to Upper Canada College and then off to Trinity and on and on. Like, this is somebody with, you know, a much more regular Canadian upbringing who went on to not only hold one of the biggest jobs in government that you can hold in Canada, to hold that same role in the UK. It's like, look, I'll give him his due. That's a hell of a lot better resume than I have, and I think I've done okay in life. But so I think there's an attraction to that. You know, if we're going to just be totally fair to the guy, which I'm not normally inclined to be, but like I think it's got to be a big part of it. Look, I've had some interactions with him over the years, mostly when I worked for Harper. I think he's a pretty charming guy, so I think he has some retail political skills as well. So now I'll say that maybe the less nice things, like what I saw last night, I described it as all the jokes were there, but the comedic timing was way off. He didn't hold that room And when he started to get a little bit of a roll going at different parts in that speech, it was almost like by accident, right? Like, so I would say he's going to need to get a lot better very quickly, because he's about to square off against, one of the most fearsome political athletes that I think Canada has ever produced in terms of Pierre Poilievre. Like, as just a raw debater and political performer, the guy is a fucking killer. And he's going to have to get on a debate stage against him. And he better bring a lot more game than what I saw last night, or it's going to be a very bruising experience for him.
Jordan, what would your take on what's behind the Carney thing?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Kory, I think, on one point particularly there, and that's the bit about the resume. I think that what's behind the enthusiasm for Carney is predominantly his resume. And actually, I think I'm going to disagree with Kory. I think it's the fact, like, that he is boring, and that's actually fine. I think that works for him in this moment. He is clearly, this is a technocrat. He's somebody who exudes competence. I do think he's nice enough. He has shown over the course of the leadership that he does have some capacity to transmit some personality publicly. But I would actually, I don't really agree. I don't think it's about his personal story. I don't think most Canadians know a single thing about his personal story. And in fact, I think he reads as somebody who does come from extremely privileged circles, from the most elite bubbles of even the global economy. But I don't think any of that is really front and center right now. What people, I think, are really reacting to is the sense that he's a pair of steady hands, and that he's actually the opposite of the drama that we're seeing from Trump. And he is, to some degree, also the opposite of the drama that we've seen from Poilievre. And so I think that sense of him just being about as exciting as a bowl of oatmeal is probably positive for him on net. And, his delivery last night, I thought Chrétien was more interesting than he was as a speech giver, and that's saying something. But the speech itself was saying all the right things. He had in there pointed attacks on Trump. He had very pointed attacks on Poilievre. I think that what he's communicating is probably the right message. And the thing that he has to hope, and that Liberals who have voted for him has to hope, is that they are able to change this election from a referendum on Justin Trudeau to a question of stability when people are afraid. And that is, the flip side of that is the same coin for the Conservatives. Is this still a change election? And every time they're able to remind voters of that, it's still theirs to lose. They still have a better shot. But I think that Carney is absolutely presenting himself as the antidote to the chaos. And I think the boring works for him.
So many, many moons ago, Scott Reid said on this show that Liberals will not be able to get Canadians to take a close look at Pierre Poilievre as long as they have to peer around Justin Trudeau to do it. And so I think this is the other factor that's gone on here, is the combination of Trudeau's departure and Trump's arrival has caused Canadians to take a serious look at Poilievre. And I think that a lot of people that intended to vote for him 6 months ago or 8 months ago are no longer convinced he's the right person for this moment. Not because he's changed, but because the moment has changed. And so I think that my personal feeling is that has at least as much to do with where Carney and the Liberals are at in the polls as anything that Carney has done up to this point, is people reassessing whether they can live with Poilievre in that job. And some of those people reassessing that are people that intended to vote New Democrat because Trudeau was a lost cause, but now see a chance to stop Poilievre in this circumstance. And so I think that there's a lot that Carney needs to improve, but I think there's a lot the Conservatives need to think about how Poilievre is positioned going into this race. And I don't know. In fact, I'm pretty sure that just more of what they've done for the last 2 years is not the answer to their problem.
I have lots of thoughts on that, but Scott, you go first, buddy.
Well, I just, to me, I strongly agree with a big TBD on all that. And I agree because I think, maybe Canadians don't know what Mark Carney is, but they know what he's not. They know he's not Trump. They know he's not Trudeau, and they know he's not Poilievre. They can feel all of that just in terms of his demeanor, his manner, his tone, which I do think is important. I hope we come back to the boring thing. I'd like to explore that more because I think it's a super interesting question. But to my mind, David, where I think you're so right, is suddenly Canadians are looking around and the roof is falling in. The roof of their beautiful treasured home is falling in. And when your roof is falling in, you hire an architect. Carney looks like an architect, right? Poilievre looks like the guy you hire to fucking scream at the architect who screwed up your roof in the first place, right? And so that's, I think, so the moment is, the moment is conspiring to support Carney. I think the TBD on all of this is fundamental rules of political gravity still apply. And so he's going to have to perform well. He's going to have to withstand attacks. He's going to have to show that he can maneuver the obstacles that the Conservatives placed in front of him, like Brookfield, and we'll see. And I'm hearing that he may move very quickly with respect to his, his assets and declarations and that kind of stuff. And I see no evidence that Poilievre has been able to shift gears. I see right now their fundamental effort is that they are still trying to run this as a change election. It really is about cost of living, the sins of the Liberals. Trudeau and Carney are peas in a pod, and my gut is that Donald Trump, if nothing else, is going to force them to change that. If we have an election and April 2nd comes, they're going to have to deal with it. Just like healthcare for the Liberals and Bonnie Crombie just couldn't cut through and allow her to compete with Ford during the Ontario campaign. And we'll have to see, and for all we know, when and if they decide to wield their Gatling guns on that, maybe the Conservatives will be good because he is a raw political animal. Boy, his tone is so fucking off. It's so partisan. It's so Trumpy sounding. Even when he says, I'm against Trump, even when he says, I'm going to take the fight to Trump, he sounds and acts and exudes Trump with the strongman bullshit, limerick rhyme stuff. So we'll see.
So I just want to read a few words from a woman named Francine Leclerc. She worked at our sponsor CN for 34 years before retiring back in 2015. Given that we just observed International Women's Day over the weekend, I thought her story is worth sharing. Francine worked in hard jobs as a brakeman, her term, then as a foreman, also her term, and eventually as an engineer in command up in the locomotive, piloting trains on CN's main lines. I was one of the first women, she says, of her first days in 1981. It really was a man's world at the time. Some of the old-timers snubbed their noses and tested me on hard switches, but I've always been very physically strong. She continues, I adored the independence. Sure, there were days when it was minus 30 and you're trudging through thigh-high snow to uncouple cars and perform train maneuvers. And the hours were tough, particularly as the mother of a child. That's the hardest part for women. Luckily, my partner is a railroader too, and understood what the job entails. Equality starts at home as much as it does on the job. So many people at CN have grandparents who work there. It's always nice hearing my grandfather did this or that. What I'd love to hear more of is granddaughters saying, my grandmother worked here too. Now, obviously, Francine is a pretty tough woman, but she also stood on the shoulders of an earlier generation, the wartime generation. World War II was what really forced open railway gates for women. They became railroaders, hired into positions unavailable to them until then. They acquired a taste for independence and accomplishment and did not look back. It hardly bears mentioning that the company and the rail industry are vastly better off as a result. CN would like to express its gratitude to Francine, her entire cohort, and the women of the previous generation. On International Women's Day, it bears thinking about those who came before.
Yeah, I think that's true. I watched most of Poilievre's rally speech in London. I think I missed a few minutes of it on the front end, but the core attack that he leveled on Carney, Look, I thought it was good insofar as it, tried to tie him to some very unpopular elements of the Trudeau legacy. But I kind of was Scott that it was, it felt a bit off topic for where the electorate is. And I would say that, the Venn diagram of like narrative that Carney laid out in his speech and the campaign narrative that Ford just got reelected on, in Ontario, it's almost identical. It's almost complete overlap. And, maybe this is just self-congratulatory bullshit, but I think that narrative works really well for us very recently with a very important part of the electorate. And I'm a little perplexed why the Conservatives aren't trying to occupy more of that frame. And I think maybe the key part of it is you got to be a bit happier of a warrior in this circumstance, because I think the partisan sort of barbs and caustic stuff does look Trumpian. And I think the tone is not meeting the moment very well. I think that partisanship can run counter to this sort of wave of rally around the flag, patriotic sentiment that you're seeing, like every corner of the country right now. It sounds like you're, shit talking the country a little too much, and the nature of those attacks is maybe a little less charitable than people are in their own mind right now.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say that the challenge too for him is that that's actually probably the most difficult aspect of his strategy to shift, because that's really quite core to who he is as a political person. It has been throughout his career, even prior to his leadership. That is really his personality. And so I don't think that they're going to have a lot of luck moving that. And the problem with that is that there's very little baked into that sort of says hope and positivity and forward-looking stuff. I think that the other thing that we have to say out loud is that his base is now a big problem. So he's got about a third of his vote coalition that actively has positive feelings about Trump, even in the face of this tariff war. And in order for him to win, and again, we should be clear, like he's still ahead. It's still the Conservatives in many ways to lose this election, but he has to hold the 2/3 of his base who are, like most Canadians, who are very anti-Trump and quite concerned about the impacts of this war. And he has to hold that 1/3 who are more pro-Trump. And so that puts him in a very awkward position in terms of the type of messaging that he needs to bring forward to hold that, but also still keep that. Like, that's also the problem when you're winning too big, right? Like, you have a very broad and very challenging coalition to hold together. And I think that part of what we're seeing right now is the awkwardness of that coming home as the Liberals are again in the process of growing their vote coalition.
But maybe the reason why he's not convincing as an anti-Trump, anti-MAGA figure is that he doesn't really feel it.
Yeah,
he's pro the U.S.
Well, let's not fucking bullshit ourselves. Until a month and a half ago, his own caucus, they were all pretty heavy duty in love with MAGA. Like, everybody reckon, I'm not going to support like the grabber by the pea kind of bullshit. But, by and large, there are endless photographs of them wearing MAGA hats. There are endless expressions of, we need that kind of strength and we need to show that and and cheering the results and stuff. So they will bristle at it and they'll bitch and moan and complain and spit. But I think that you can run a lot of freaking ads showing them looking MAGA, celebrating MAGA, and I think it's harmful because
I think the problem is they copied those tactics, right? They copied those tactics and they baked them into his political persona, and that's actually pretty hard to undo now.
But a MAGA problem.
In fairness to Poilievre, though, I think the words that he has spoken of late around the Canada-US issue are very harsh, they're very sharp, and I think in a way that's consistent with, this pushback against Trumpism, and I'm certainly not going to question the guy's patriotism. I think that's all there. I think it's more just the stylistic piece that you're talking about, Scott, where it doesn't line up.
Although some of his coalition is.
Yeah. look, I think the really tough narrative on the Trudeau legacy has a lot of appeal for conservative voters. Like, I agree with almost every word of what he has to say around that. I just think for a chunk of voters you need to, if you want to have a majority government, are not sold on that. They are less, partisan in nature. They are less perhaps focused on some of those issues, like the long rant on crime, for instance. It's not like anyone's in favor of crime, but like if you're looking to get 55 plus women in your corner, it's not, going through this sort of lock them up and throw away the key narrative. Like, I just don't think that like that's compelling more to guys like me, I think, than it is to the voters are trying to attract. And I think those female voters are so animated by Trump and so turned off by his approach to communications and politics and everything that if you sound like that guy, like they're like, no, thank you, I don't like that guy.
But that's it. It's the last in, first out in terms of his vote coalition, and those are going to be some of the most challenging voters to hold there. But I think it's also, you point to a bunch of things. Some of them are now in the rearview mirror for voters, so that's going to be hard to tie back to.
Sure. I just want to move it back for half a second to Carney, because I do think this brings up a really interesting question. Carney's a brand new entity on the political scene. He's never held political office. He's never really competed politically. Sure, he's lived in and around public policy, government circles, and he's charming and he knows how to do certain things. He's learning on the job relatively quickly as a very capable, intelligent guy. But let's go back to, you didn't like his comedic timing, Kory. And so it makes me wonder, when you think if part of Poilievre's challenge right now isn't just what he's saying and the positions he's taken, but the manner in which he projects those positions, and whether the manner is Trumpian and it's a turnoff. And even when he barks at how he's going to take apart Trump, it feels like Trump to at least say women voters or many others. Yeah. And then you go, well, Carney does feel sometimes as flat as a plate of soup. What are we going to do about that? Do we need to? And I still think, look, you can't use that as a rationale for underachieving. You can't use it as a rationale to say, I don't need to improve my skills at the podium. I don't need to improve my energy and my ability to rally the room. Of course, you need to learn those things. But I do think there's something in what David and Jordan are saying about how his manner is so even.
Managerial.
Yeah, it's so managerial that just in its, even when it's like, I'm going, oh man, he just stepped on that line. He didn't show the patience to wait the half beat for the audience to laugh, chuckle, or applause. He stepped on it, and that shows his inexperience, and he's not quite as polished at the podium. But then again, like, maybe the old gray mare is what people need right now. Maybe that's what a lot of voters are going to be reaching for, because that's not what they got from Trudeau. It's not what they're getting from Poilievre, and it sure as shit isn't what Donald Trump has on offer. So, again, I don't want to use that as a rationale to say, so don't worry about it. Don't fix any of your blemishes. But maybe he doesn't need to become a razor boot beams populist.
Well, and he's not going to in the next week. So I think that they have to work with that and make it an asset. But I think the reality is that Trump has sucked up all the space for drama that there is in Canadian politics at the moment.
It has come to my attention that I, Gary, the AI-generated voice who shills for air quotes media, am not popular with our listeners on YouTube. Or should I say one listener goes by an alias of cutlery and soiled clothing. Well, suck it, Fork Laundry. This one's for you. Actually, Forky, it's a proposal for everybody, and you're gonna like it. Advertise on air quotes pods, and you can get my nauseating voice off the air. Because your message will be read by one of our influential and human hosts, David Herle, Kate Hammer, or Mike McDonald. Or just record any piece of creative in your ad agency's fancy production studio and send it to us. Either way, you'll be reaching Canada's most influential listeners at this crucial intersection of politics, and who knows what the fuck happens next. Trump, a new prime minister, new economic policy, a whole new world order. Baby! My data points are tingling. Curse of Politics, the Hurly-Burly, and Hotel Pacifico have the ears of cabinet ministers, elected officials, and the political class, leading journalists, the C-suite, and tens of thousands of engaged Canadians. Prime influence time. So let's do Forky a solid. Email us at contact@airquotesmedia.com to get rid of Gary and get your message to the decision makers.
Okay, Jordan. Speaking of drama, let's create some here. So, the NDP have seen their vote go down from 20%, where they were tied with the Liberals, to mid-teens in this new Carney world. Seen their projected seat totals, although after Ontario, you're entitled to blow off seat models and seat projections with a little bit of authority. And
you guys can take a spoonful of sugar and turn it into 30 seats.
And heading into an election in which there's not an obvious place for the NDP in the main conversation about the Canada-US relationship. There's going to be an election called probably in a week. Jagmeet Singh walks up to the mic on E-Day to lay out the thesis for his campaign. What is it?
Yeah. So the thesis for the campaign has to be linked to the Trump question, because that is the only thing that is going to be framing this election. And I think he has to make the case that in the moment when Canada is under attack from the United States, from its closest ally, that you need somebody there who's going to be on your side to defend the kinds of programs and protections and things that Canadians rely on when things get tough economically here. He has got to take up the space that Carney is vacating on the left. And he has to be able to speak to that group of voters who are currently checking out Carney and the Liberals. And I don't want to say that they're necessarily going to stay. Things are very volatile right now in terms of where people are. And he has to make a case to bring them home, that you have to have New Democrats there to do things like defend our healthcare and not sell out to the Americans, to do things like make sure that there's support there for workers in a meaningful way when unemployment happens. And so I think that is the space that the New Democrats need to take up. And then they need to boost that, of course, with a really strong ground game, with good investments in their incumbent seats, and frankly, a lot of the things that we saw the Ontario NDP do to be able to buck that trend there. But look, and I think I don't want to diminish it. This is like a very hard spot to go into a campaign. But New Democrats are also pretty used to going into campaigns as underdogs. And we've seen past Liberal leadership bounces come and go. The challenge this time is time, right? So normally those bounces have some time to evaporate before we get into a writ. That's not necessarily going to be the case this time. So there is a portion of disqualification that's also going to have to happen from the left in terms of those voters who are NDP Liberal switchers, about making Carney a little bit less appealing. I think the path on that aspect is pretty clear. He was out there talking last night about scrapping the capital gains. Again, that's for 0.1% of the wealthiest Canadians. He's made a lot of moves that open up that territory for the NDP. So they need to get out there and occupy it. But I think at the moment, what they can also say, what the New Democrats can count on, is that the electorate is not locked in. People are paying a lot more attention, and this is also different from Ontario, where voters were not really tuned in. People are looking, they're shopping around, and so I think we're going to see a lot of potential movement in these numbers over the course of the campaign.
What do you guys think?
Well, it's hard to argue, I think, within any of that in terms of what the NDP strategy will be. I think the challenge, though, is what you put on the floor in your question, David. I think it's just so difficult to be a part of that conversation that's going on around tariffs and around Trump if you're the NDP. And look, I assume that Carney is going to be going down to Washington during the campaign, similar to what Ford did, but but at a more senior level. Like I think. It's just so hard to shoehorn your way into that narrative, into that debate, to that discussion. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I would critique what Jordan said, because, I think that's the obvious thing they have to do. I'm not sure it's enough.
Yeah, it feels to me like it's just a couple of factors. The fact that Poilievre himself is a threatening figure to progressive voters, and then the addition of the Trump dynamic raises the stakes on who the government is to a point that makes it very difficult for the
It's a tough hand. And I don't want to diminish that. It's a tough hand right now. And I think that strategic vote dynamic, that question of viability, that haunts New Democrats every campaign. I think it's going to be intensified in this one. But look, they can only control what they can control, right? They can't dictate what's happening with Trump. They can't, control the dynamic between the Liberals and the Conservatives. So they need to look very clearly at the voters they're speaking to, find the message that moves and motivates them, and talk to them. That's what they got to do.
I think they need luck. I think they need. I don't think that they have anything on offer in terms of the core ingredients going into this campaign. I don't think that Singh is well liked, and I don't think he's going to be well liked. I don't think he's seen as a viable leader in this circumstance and set of issues. I think that is a complete dragon anchor. I think the issue set, obviously, like we've talked about, threatens a 1988 polarization, 1988-esque polarization, all of which works against them. So in a weird way, what they need is they need the fourth week of the campaign. They need one of the two parties to clearly be in command and on track for an undisputed majority, so that they can ask people to then think about, okay, now what else are we going to do in this campaign? So that he could then have a decent debate where he sort of shows up and at least marshals some of his progressive vote, where he says there's no need, since we are more or less sure that Poilievre is going to win the election with a majority, or that Carney is going to win the election with a majority. What you now need, therefore, is someone to keep Mark Carney, the banker, on a leash when it comes to his progressive impulses, or we need someone that is a cell of people who will fight against the abject authoritarianism of Poilievre in power. Give us your votes. They have to have permission for people in that fourth week to go with the NDP. But that requires you to be losing clearly before you get the opportunity to maybe thread that needle. And I'll be goddamned if I can see another opportunity to cast votes, because I don't think any of the thing about the current conditions outlook conspire to help the NDP.
Okay, let's swing around to one last topic while we have time. Scott, one of the speeches that we have not talked about from last night is Prime Minister Trudeau's speech from last night. Which, by the way, I mean, as an old timer, as a vet, I can't believe what a lame ass send off they put on for him. Like, I mean, we used to have tributes to outgoing leaders, and especially if they'd been prime minister, and performers would come in and there'd be testimonials and all sorts of video tributes and histories of their career. Nothing. The guy gets to stand up and give his own speech, and he's the warm-up act for the fucking Chrétien. It was like really strange to me. I mean, I'm not his biggest fan, but I think he deserved a hell of a lot better send-off from the Liberal Party than that. We wouldn't even be holding this goddamn convention if it wasn't for his efforts back in 2014, 2015. So there's that. But nonetheless, he gave a speech in which he said it wasn't about the past, it was about the future. But of course it was about the past. And of course it was about his record. And, he's had a run in the last couple of weeks dealing with Trump that has a lot of Liberals wondering if he wouldn't have been viable.
He wouldn't
as the leader if this circumstance was still in place. So, right. Scott, you start off, opine on the Trudeau record as we heard it last night and as it exists right now.
I agree with you about the thinness of last night's tribute. It was going to be even thinner. He originally hadn't even planned to be there. It's only because of the rally of the last couple of weeks that I think allowed him to stand on that stage and inclined him to be there. And, it isn't like the old days when you had 4 or 5 day convention and that the first night was a tribute to the leader. So all of that either has to be jammed into the same night, except you've got this awkwardness where the party basically unseated him, and the new leader requires distance from him in order to be politically viable. Everyone in the room knows it. Even Trudeau knows it. Trudeau resents it. limiting it, for diminishing it. And it isn't fair to a guy who led the party from no place back into government and then held government for essentially a decade. It's not fair to him. I think that his legacy is going to be entirely dictated by what happens next. I really do. Like if the party, if things reverse, if this is a short-term bounce and the party is obliterated, like it felt like it was going to be 2 months ago, then I think that Trudeau's legacy is really, really, really going to be harsh. I think it's going to be took them from third and left them a third and a bunch of all that stuff. If, on the other hand, Carney is able to renew a party. You know what your legacy is? Your legacy is not having your political party absolutely incinerated because of where you've taken them and left them. And so if Carney can renew the party and he's reelected, then there will be plenty of space, plenty of room, and plenty of inclination toward generosity toward Trudeau to evaluate the fullness of his term. You won't have to wait 40 years for historians to do it. It will start to happen much sooner. And he's a young man. He's going to be going to these conventions, Chrétien-like, for 35 fucking more years. So he's going to be around and he's going to have an opportunity to write his legacy and write his own history. So he's had a couple of good weeks. I think that's allowed him to move out of office with his head high, and Carney gives him a chance to have a legacy that isn't about political failure.
Yeah, what a difficult thing to have to try to do yesterday. Like, you know, if this was like more of a traditional, like, delegated convention, you know, this would have been done on Saturday night. You know, like the night before, the Friday night or something, right? Where you set aside some time to do that reflection. But like the last thing you really want if you're Carney's team is to be sharing a stage with Trudeau and having people reflect on Trudeau, because no amount of reflection is going to be very good for the general population right now. That said, I thought he did as well as you can with that speech. And I thought the room received it with a fair amount of generosity in their heart. And I'm not sure that would have been the case, a few weeks ago, if he hadn't had, a couple of good weeks on the Trump stuff. Like, I think there was, a more generous mood in the room than I would have anticipated. But I don't know. You guys know your party a lot better than I do, so maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, no, I think it's true. I think there's a lot of goodwill toward him in the party.
Yes.
An awful lot of goodwill toward him.
I think he will be ultimately judged kindly by history. But look, like, he was only able to have these good few weeks on the Trump issue, frankly, because he wasn't running again. And I think that enabled him to focus on that rather than on, you can only imagine what the internal discussions would be looking like now if he hadn't been departed by Freeland when he was. And I do think that last night had some moments that were incredibly awkward for him, not the least of which was that one of the leadership candidates was the person who knifed him. But, to sit there while Carney talks about jettisoning as his first order of business what Trudeau himself views as his legacy on the carbon tax. That wasn't great. I think that probably there were those in the room who would have preferred that he just hustled out of the back door, But that's also the tough reality of what happens because he didn't read the room and he did not orchestrate his own departure. And so he is where he is in that regard.
In the still unlikely event that Carney is able to bring the Liberals back to power, like, imagine that sentence I just said out loud, like, imagine that 2 months ago. It seems crazy to say. But in the event that does happen, has another significant effect. It isn't just that Trudeau isn't faced with a humiliating end to his career because his party gets crushed. It is also that some elements of his policy legacy will survive. When we talk about the carbon tax and so forth, but a number of the other initiatives will not be abandoned by Carney. And so Trudeau will be able to lay claim to them and talk about them, however they develop and persevere over the years. Whereas if the party is devastated and Poilievre takes over the supermajority, that entire policy legacy will be eviscerated, absolutely flamed. And so, Trudeau didn't want to leave, but Trudeau has a lot at stake in Carney's success.
Well, I'll say one other thing that I really noted from the larger presentation at the convention, it felt like more of a reclamation of what I would say are traditional liberal, vibes, right? Very wrapped in the flag. A lot more stuff, like some videos on the party's history and Laurier and all of that. And I really think Trudeau separated the party from those things in ways that didn't serve it well. And it felt like the Canada Strong stuff, all of that, like it felt very much more like what I would have seen when you guys were there with Martin or with Chrétien before him, like a much more deliberate nationalism. But the liberal view of what that nationalism looks like, not particularly what my view is on some of these things, but like what I would perceive as a long-standing hits.
Assuming the symbols, taking the flag, taking red, taking all those things that Pierre Trudeau did in the early 80s in that term, right?
Yeah.
And you just feel all that stuff sort of like if you're the Conservatives, and again, they're still on track to win. They're still in the whip position. Like, let's not get too mental here. But you are looking at it right now, and you could, if you're Jenny, you got to be kind of angry, right, at the world, because you're saying to yourself, I can't believe how quickly these fuckers can slide back in and say that the flag is theirs and that claim to being the party of nationhood is theirs. I can't believe how these guys are going to allow like some technocrat, some guy who has no political history, just wander in and go, hi, I'm a banker and I'm here to save you. You can thank me as you fucking exit, Pierre Poilievre. Like, you got to look at it. If you're them, you got to be thinking to yourself, what the fuck? How can this be happening?
Well, I'm happy that the nationalist coat is slipping on as comfortably as it is, because as Kory says, it was completely abandoned for a decade. And we became the party that ran Canada down. And it was a bizarre abandonment of what had historically been a core strength of the party. And ironically, it is this goddamn Trump crisis that has forced the party to reassert itself as the voice of nationalism and nationhood in Canada.
Well, not just nationalism, but Carney's huge mandate. Like, he now has a clear mandate to steer the party back firmly to the right, towards the center. And that is that was also a big part of what was endorsed in that room last night.
That wouldn't strike me as that right-wing a speech last night.
Oh, I think, no, he's opening up lots of space. Like, this is the part of turning away from the Trudeau legacy that he is bringing in is a big part of moving away from a lot of those things. And I think that there's lots of room opening up on the center left that he's vacating there.
If we're talking about the identity side of issues, then I hope he does that.
I'm talking about the economic side.
If you're talking about economics,
he's out there talking about cutting government spending, rolling back taxes that were going to be on the super wealthy. These are all things that were economic symbols that the Trudeau government brought in. In fact, you'll remember it was not even a year ago where this was, according to Freeland, existentially necessary in order to prevent our society from fragmenting, from inequality. But now they're out the window. So I think that it actually is an explicitly right-leaning economic argument that he's bringing forward from a personality and somebody whose background sits very firmly in that space as well. And maybe that works for them, but that is a space that they're opening up.
All right, it's time for our Hey Yous.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Kory?
I do, and it's kind of building on what we were just talking about. I want to do a hey you to Katie Telford, who I saw, wandering around and had a few minute chat with. But we talked a little bit about this earlier, and like how brutal a business this can be, and it's really unprecedented to have played a senior role, like a chief of staff role, for as long as she did. And it's got to feel like a little bit ungracious of a party, when you are leaving. And, maybe it's like bad relationships or something. If it didn't end badly, it wouldn't end, right? Like, but like politics always seems to end in tears. And I just want to, tip my hat to her and also to the Trudeau team. Lots I don't like about what they did in terms of policy and many other things, but as somebody who's worked in this business, you got to have a lot of respect for that kind of longevity, and I think we all know the kinds of sacrifices and things that come part and parcel with doing these jobs and doing them for that amount of time. So anyway, hey Katie, I think you've got a lot to be proud of, and wish you all the success in whatever you do next.
Hear, hear.
Nice. All right, Jordan, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, to build on what Kory was saying, I think I was really struck by the longevity of a lot of folks in that room who have worked at the highest level in the federal scene for more than a decade now, and how much politics has changed in this 10 years too. How polarized it's become, how frankly at times dangerous it's become to be a polarizing public figure in public office, and how hard that is. And so I think that's something that deserves acknowledgement. This is not an easy time to be a political person in, and Trudeau and his team saw Canada through some genuinely very difficult moments. And I also, as a policy nerd, I did want to shout out one accomplishment that nobody talks about anymore, even the Liberals don't really talk about, and it's not dental care or pharmacare, because that was the NDP's idea, but something else that the Liberals did way back in 2016 because it was the right thing to do before there were big cameras around it. And that was the increase that they made to the child tax benefit. And this is, I think, one of actually the most consequential things that they have done in government. They have lifted many, many, many thousands of families out of poverty with this. I think that's a change that's going to endure. I think it was done for all the right reasons. And I really think that's the type of thing that is really very important to commend in public life. So thank you for your service.
Nice. Two nice ones in a row. Scott, what do you got?
Mine is almost exactly the same. It is to Trudeau. I mean, we are probably a day or two from the end of his time as Prime Minister, and therefore effectively the end of his political career. And 10 years is some kind of run. 12 years as leader is some kind of run. And it was peppered with electoral successes and a bunch of achievements. I think his greatest achievements was his ability to manage the unpredicted. Donald Trump in his first term and the renegotiation of free trade, it obviously stands out, but also his response to the pandemic, which I think is important and might even play an important role politically, because I think the ability to move into the space that was being abandoned by anything and everyone during the pandemic and say government is going to have people's backs, and we're going to have to do things we never contemplated. We're going to have to send people checks to stay at home and not work. We're going to have to send businesses checks to not open their doors. This is the only rational remedy to what confronts us. In subtle ways, Poilievre seeks to relitigate that, and it happens all the time. And I just think that it was a soaring achievement, and so it's to Trudeau. I think we have to respect and honor all that he achieved and all that he did for the party and the country. And I want to add one little specific tweak. Like a lot of people, I think that Trudeau has been fantastic this last couple of weeks. I think that the threat of Trump has allowed him to leave office as a principled warrior against a menacing, misanthropic threat. And his words have been so strong. That first speech a month ago, the speech last week again. There's a kid in his office, Jared Froman. What a crackerjack pen he's been swinging. So throw that out to him. PMO, but I'll go with the speechwriter because, us comms guys always stick together.
Well, that was all lovely. My hey you goes out to Mark Carney. I have been imagining Mark Carney as leader of the Liberal Party and Prime Minister of Canada for 15 years. And I am absolutely and utterly thrilled that has come to pass. It was a very moving and rewarding experience for me last night to see him be elected leader of the party. And I'm very excited to see him as Prime Minister. So, Mark, thanks for doing this. It's going to be great. All right. that is our show for this week. I want to thank Jordan, Scott, and Kory for being here with me. Kory and I just had some sort of alarm in our hotel, which we completely ignored, probably to our looming detriment. But in any event,
hopefully we're not going to die in a fiery inferno here. But
this will be the last pod as constituted as you currently see it.
All right. Thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS and CN, and all you accursed for watching or listening to this show. And we'll be back next week, which is likely election call week, for more Accursed Politics. We'll see you then.